American politics always gravitates to the next election. Today's guest is Iowa's chief election officer who has a front row seat to politics in Iowa. We sit down with Iowa's Secretary of State Paul Pate on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.
For decades, Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond. Now celebrating more than 40 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa Public Television. This is the Friday, July 12 edition of Iowa Press. Here is David Yepsen.
The nonstop cycle of politics and the next election seems to align with the certainty of death and taxes here in Iowa. Even-numbered election years, fueled by odd-numbered campaign years, keeps elections and election laws on the front burner for voters and for our guest, Paul Pate, who was re-elected last November to his third term as Iowa's Secretary of State and has just been elected president of the National Association of Secretaries of State. Mr. Pate, welcome back to the show.
Pleasure.
Congratulations on your new national job.
Well, it is. Did you notice the Secret Service attachment now that's with me?
Across the table, Erin Murphy is Des Moines Bureau Chief for Lee Enterprises, and Kay Henderson is News Director at Radio Iowa.
Secretary Pate, let's discuss something that's entered the political ether in advance of this weekend. There's a new book out by Tim Alberta. He is a Politico reporter. He is reporting that President Trump asked Iowa GOP Chairman Jeff Kaufman to invalidate the results of the 2016 caucuses. You're a Republican who participates in the caucuses. Is that possible?
Well, it's in the sense that would we invalidate? No. Iowa's got a good reputation. We have a lot on the line. And it's crucial we have that transparency, whether it's Republican or Democrats. And to have that kind of activity would be devastating. So I have confidence that we'll keep our integrity there and we'll make sure our caucuses are run on the up and up.
So for folks who watch this show, each week it's on, there was a guest, Craig Robinson, the former political director for the Iowa GOP, and he said that, you know, your office and county auditors should be involved in the caucuses and helping maintain the integrity of them. What are your thoughts in getting election officials involved to ensure that the results are what everyone believes them to be?
Well, it's a fine line. I mean, caucuses are party building functions. They're not a formal election for an official. So that kind of makes it a little awkward for us to get into doing that. We do make ourselves available to both political parties, and we have three, we'll do three, in regards to assisting them with what they might need from us to make the caucus successful. And the bottom line is it's a party building structure.
But you have more people attending the caucuses than vote in the primaries.
Well, it's a discussion that Iowans have had and continue to have, and we'll probably see more of that as we go down the path. Clearly, in the past, when the parties wanted our input, we'd try to give it to them. Right now, my advice, and I've been very vocal about it, is we want them to make sure that transparency is there, and no matter what happens and how they approach it, that the national media can see Iowans in action and that they hear their voice.
But let me follow up. So shouldn't the Secretary of State's office and county auditors and the people who run elections in this state take a bigger role in running these caucuses? You know, we're not talking about a sheriff here. We're talking about the American presidency. And you're doing it with, you're counting votes with volunteers and part-time party workers.
Well, I think that, again, we got to remember where this is coming from. If the political parties feel we're at that plateau, and that's where we should be going to, yes, we would step up and be happy to be a part of it. But at this point, it's still their party building structure. And you see nationally the pressure on the caucuses are really fighting for their own survival in regards to that. Most states do primaries. And there you will have the Secretary of State's being directly involved.
So should Iowa have a primary instead of a caucus?
No, I'm not a fan of that. I started my experience in government politics going to my first caucus, sitting in that little kindergarten classroom on a little tiny chair for 3 hours, discussing all the important issues of Iowans and doing my straw poll, and I wouldn't give it up for anything.
Erin?
David mentioned the next election is never far away. Before we get into election security, which we want to talk to you about, we want to talk a little bit about politics in the next election. In 2018, Republicans at the federal level anyways took a hit here. Some losses in the suburbs helped the Democrats win a couple congressional seats, made some gains in the Iowa State House. Look into your crystal ball. How do you feel about your party's chances in 2020? And are the suburbs lost to Republicans? Are these trade issues going to be a drag on Republican candidates?
Well, I think the Republicans are taking note of what happened. It was a pretty good wake-up call, if you want to call it that. I would suspect that the candidates themselves are retooling to make sure their messaging is getting out. The suburbs are not lost to the Republicans, but now what they have to acknowledge is that they're also not safe ground either. You have to fight for every vote and make sure you're out there doing it. So they can't shortchange it. We also got to remember we did our pretty well on the Mississippi River side of the state for Republicans, which used to be considered nothing but Democrat country. It just shows the terrain shifts. The terrain shifts every time, and we just have to watch it closer. And the candidates are really what it's about.
Can that be the strategy? Can Republicans say write off the suburbs and say, well, these are where our voters now, like you mentioned, on the Mississippi River counties?
No. If any candidate says write off, they're going to lose. You don't write off anything. You may not necessarily get a big victory there, but you've got to go in for the votes you need out of those areas.
You've run for governor. You've been elected Secretary of State 3 times. You've been mayor of Cedar Rapids. So this isn't your first rodeo.
Right.
What's your gut tell you? I mean, the Democrats got more votes for Congress than the Republicans did in this place in 2018. Does that bode well for President Trump in November? Is Iowa a battleground state in November?
I think Iowa's a battleground state. I think that the president has to come back in here and reestablish himself with those areas because you can't take them for granted. We've never been a Republican-Democrat state in a long, long time, so it is a battleground, and he's going to have to come in and get his votes.
I want to switch to election issues, and particularly cybersecurity. There's a lot of talk these days. The FBI recently warned small local governments about the problem of malware and ransomware. Hackers coming in, seizing your data, not giving it back to you until you pay them a ransom. And many communities are paying it just to get their data back.
Yeah.
What does that mean for our election security? And what advice do you have to Iowans and to local officials about this question?
Well, we have to take it very seriously, and we have been here in Iowa. It's been a high priority in my office. You know, we have established a great partnership with our local county auditors, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, every level, if you will. We're only as effective as our weakest point, and local government tends to be the most vulnerable. So we have to make sure they have what it takes to get there. It's securing the technical side. It's also making sure that we do our best with the human factor. Every day when we open our email pieces, there's these phishing scams going on to try to get in. So it's a battle. In Iowa, we run about 400,000 bad actors, I'll call it, trying to get into the system in state government every day, up to 1 million. And they're trying to make a buck. They're trying to steal identities. And we've got to be vigilant all the time. And I think we're doing that.
What about local government? So you're aware of this. You're into this issue at the national level. States got IT people. What about some small county auditor out there? How do they fight a Russian hacker?
Well, what we've done in my office is we partnered with the state's OCIO office. And
What's that?
It's the office of our IT department.
Okay.
And we went to them and we've offered them extensive services, Albert sensors, anti-malware, monitoring, all the things that they would need to be protected. And we've been very proud of the fact that we have all 99 now on board. where the state and federal government, we are helping them watch every day to keep the bad actors away. It's kind of like making sure you have a good security or police force watching your neighborhood to make sure burglars aren't coming through. So we have those in place right now. We're trying to improve on them every day because there's new things coming at us. But we have to do that. We have to, and we're going beyond that now. I'm meeting with County Board of Supervisors and saying it's not enough to protect the auditors. We need to protect your whole courthouse. So it's an evolving battle.
In 2016, you had President Trump saying it's rigged. You had Bernie Sanders saying it's rigged. You came out and had a news conference and said the election results are not rigged. Are you going to have to do that again in 2020?
Yes. Yes,
Why?
sadly. Yes, sadly. We talked about cyber as being an issue. The bad actors, Russia, China, Iran, trying to play. Well, they're not fools. That's the frontal attack on our infrastructure side. They've been doing a much more effective job on dealing with our minds. The Russians have been attacking our minds and public opinion much more effectively. They have not been successful on hacking into a single vote in the country. They manipulate things. They put messages and propaganda out there, creating doubt. And that's a sad thing, and it's very dangerous because when Americans start questioning the integrity of the vote, going, that's not my president, that's not my governor, we've got problems. So as secretaries, we're calling out our colleagues. We're going to the media, we're going to the public and saying, don't take things at face value. You really do have to go beyond saying just Google it. You have to seriously look at where you're getting your information from and make sure you're not getting played. And that's a big priority, very big priority.
Let's turn to some of the legislation that was enacted this past year by the legislature and the governor. There was a disputed election up in Northeast Iowa about absentee ballots. The legislature has decided that every absentee ballot should have a marking on it. Some people call it a barcode to determine when it was mailed. Is that the result that you were hoping for? Were you hoping for a different result in that the ballot actually had to be physically in the auditor's office on the Monday before the election?
I preferred the barcode, and that was my proposal originally, and I was glad that that's the direction we ended up going with. But we have to have a line in the sand. Elections can't just drag on after the designated election day. But it has to also be definitive. You have to understand where it's at so nobody's going, you moved the line. And the barcode is the easiest one at this time, and I'm glad we're doing that.
The voter ID law, Secretary Pate, that has been implemented in Iowa got a soft rollout in this last election. One of the concerns that had been raised at the time that it would maybe disenfranchise some voters, keep people away from the polls because they didn't feel they had the proper identification or maybe didn't understand the law. Based on what you saw in 2018, did that happen? Are you confident that...
Record turnout for midterms, so apparently it didn't have an impact. So I think it clearly works fine. And will continue to evolve as people get more comfortable with it, and our poll workers are more comfortable with it. That's why we did the soft rollout. We're the only state that did that because we wanted Iowans to have a chance to, experience it, and so that we'd be successful. And I think it was a success.
Part of that soft rollout was if people didn't have the right identification, they could sign an affidavit,
Sure.
and that won't be an option once the law is officially on the books for 2020, correct?
Correct.
So how many of those did you see? Was there a lot of that which would kind of give us a glimpse into how many people didn't come to the polls?
Well, we've looked at it real
prepared?
closely, and those who did use the signature approach, well over 90% of them do have a driver's license. So to some extent, I think some of them it was a protest, if we will. But the point is they still get to vote. We can do provisional ballots. So no one's going to get turned away. We just want to make it smoother and easier for them.
So are you confident once we get to 2020 now, and this is all the way on the books, the law is official, that it will go smoothly?
Oh, I most certainly do. I think between the poll workers and both major political parties, they want their voters to be successful too. So they're going to make sure it happens.
One thing that legislators discussed was the idea that it's hard to get poll workers.
Yes.
Do you think that the number of precincts are exorbitant? How would you address, I know you've been discussing voting centers as opposed to a precinct. Why?
Well, we've always had this challenge. I mean, let's face it, poll workers is a very demanding position. It's a long day. So we've had to be creative in reaching out to high school students and college students. We're actually encouraging the counties to look at going to veterans because they've demonstrated a public service component. But yes, I think you're going to see in the future combining some precincts. You're going to see potentially clustering and creating more voting locations in one site, if you will. And eventually, and this is way down the road, but yeah, you'll see some vote centers where, if you live in Dallas County, you might be getting a chance to vote in Polk County because of your commute. So there's a lot of technology coming down the line that might give you that opportunity.
I want to go back to the caucuses for a minute. Are caucus results secure? I noticed the state party in the Democratic Party is looking at using dial-up to tabulate in their virtual caucus, this process of people who aren't at the caucus being able to call up and cast a vote. Are we going back to the future? We want to go back to paper ballots. We're going to go back to dial-up. Are you confident that that's going to work? What's your observation?
Well, I'd like to know more about what they're going to do. I mean, you've probably heard more than I have even on this topic, David. Clearly, they have to make sure they have safeguards in place because, back to what we said earlier, we don't want to create any doubt where people can be skeptical about it. So if they haven't thought it through and haven't put those safeguards in place, they might find themselves in a position of where Iowa will become such a question mark that it won't have the same validity and impact in the future.
It appears that there is a national debate about how to redistrict. Aside from Iowa's redistricting law, which is done by a nonpartisan, the lines are drawn by a nonpartisan. In your view, who should be counted when you're drawing those district lines?
Are you referring to the population base?
Yeah, the population should,
I think that's going to be an ongoing political potato. That's what the whole census question's about. There are those wanting to get to whether we're going to count citizens and what define citizens. That even gets into a whole other discussion area. I think it would be beneficial if we had that public debate. Let's have it, get it done with, so we can move forward. Instead, it just seems like it's fingernails on a chalkboard. It just keeps coming down, and we keep talking about it, and it's a rallying point for political people. But Iowa we've really got a great model here. I would not trade it for any of them because I've seen what other states have experienced, and I don't want to go there. I've served in the Senate when we had to do redistricting, and I guarantee you, those legislators, when that came out, the report came out, they knew that this was probably the best one they're going to get, so they were going to vote for it and move it along. And I think Iowa is probably one of the leaders in that front and should be considered that way.
Some Democrats are concerned that the Republicans control the legislature and the governorship want to change that law. Now, leaders and the governor are saying, no, we don't want to do that. Is that your recommendation as well? Leave it alone?
Leave it alone. Yep, simple.
How about putting it in the state constitution?
I am always hesitant of putting more and more in our state constitution. I think if we, as citizens, are agreeing on what we're doing, and there's nobody saying different, what's the movement for a constitutional amendment for it? I really don't think it's necessary. If the bigger issue may be if you want to start getting into with those who want to redefine what a citizen is and those issues, those are constitutional questions that may have to come up.
Just so I'm clear, you're for allocating legislative districts on the basis of the population counts that the Census Bureau will provide. Not on the basis of who's a citizen or not.
I'm working off of we formulated here in Iowa at this time, and that's what they're doing. If there's a discussion federally and we decide to change that, well, we'll have to change that. Right. But yes, I'm more looking at how the machine works here, the mechanism in Iowa.
Secretary Pate, when we talked to you on this show before the last election, we talked a little bit about felon voting rights and how they should be approached. You said at the time that you supported the state process that was in place and still is today. This past legislative session, the governor, Governor Reynolds, pushed for a change to that process that would essentially automatically restore those rights once individuals are released from jail from their sentences. Did you support that effort by the governor, and what do you think should happen moving forward as they try to approach this again in the next legislative session?
I'm more concerned about the mechanics of it. whatever they approach and want to do, I want to make sure we can actually administer it. It's very challenging right now even, and I want to be very careful about whatever approach, whether it's the governor or the legislature might come up with one, because...
What do you mean by that? What are you talking
well,
about?
The challenge is we have people who are a felon, and they're out of jail or prison, and at what point do you give them back that right? And if you take I'll call it the easier version, that is when you're out, and you get your voting rights back, that's pretty simplistic, and we probably could administer that. But if they start going into other gray areas, like, well, we're going to wait so long, or do you have restitution done? The other side of it is we have to consider, did they have a repetitive situation where they're back in again? Call it the bureaucrat side, folks. I don't want to bore you, but I'm the guy that has to deal with all that.
Right.
And we're sorting through all these records and trying to make sure every person who's eligible to vote gets to vote when they show up. And the way it works now, it's the county auditors and the courts that keep the list, if you will. They tell us who we should take off of the list and not allow them to vote.
And there's been some concerns that some names on those lists have been incorrect. How do you proceed and guarantee the people that they have the right information?
Well, that's the challenge. And my coming back into office, we spent a ton of time and effort on trying to clean those lists up and make sure they're accurate. We went to the extent of telling auditors that even on election day, if there's any doubt, call us. If I have to, I'll have a staffer go down into the archives and pull out the physical record to help them. Vote them provisional. But that's what I'm referring to. We want to be involved in the discussion, my office does, of the mechanics of it. The policy, that's up to the governor and legislature.
So what's the easiest?
So is your preference for the simplest, that they just, once they're out, they get their rights restored, and any restitution is just going to muck up the process in your view? Would you rather see a very clean...
Well, if you're asking me as former state senator Paul Pate, I would probably give you my policy preferences, but as the Secretary of State, I'm telling you, I want to make sure we're at the table to be able to guide them so that whatever they're going to do, it can be administered fairly.
But give me your recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
Why shouldn't the legislature say it's the Secretary of State's job to do this? Designate you, or if not you, then someone else. The buck stops with you. Right now you get this situation where people are going, ooh, me, no, you.
I wouldn't have a problem with that, David, if they wanted to designate it that way. So there is a clear line of who's responsible for the process. But at this time, right now, it's the governor and the legislature who get to do that, not me.
It seems as if, tell me if I'm hearing this correctly, if you tie the voting right to repayment of restitution, that's something that's in flux, and that you would have to check on the eve of Election Day. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think nobody wants that. I've not really heard that a lot. The governor, we don't do that now.
The governor hasn't said that, but legislators said we want restitution repaid.
Well, and if they wish to pursue that, then we'll have to be at the table to try to work with them and figure out how you're going to do that.
How are you poll tax if you do that? It's effectively forcing somebody to pay money to vote?
Well, you may have some lawyers who want to discuss that.
Yeah, that'd be a problem.
You may.
And we've got just a minute left. In Florida, this issue has come up, and Democrats are saying that Republicans voters voted to restore voting rights. The legislature has put impediments into place. Are Republicans here, as Republicans in Florida, thwarting this because they know that given the demographics of who those felons are, you're adding a lot more Democratic voters to an electorate when you give felons their voting rights back?
I don't think the facts play out to that. Now, if you look at the votes, the felons who had their voting rights restored, sadly, they don't necessarily become active voters. The process we have now is not that hard. It really is not. And when you look at the vast majority of them who do apply, get their rights back, it just, to me, doesn't demonstrate there's a big drive by the felons that I want my voting rights back. Now, my job is to make sure everybody has access and to make sure it's as easy as possible, really, for them to be able to do it. But I don't think that would transfer that way, David. I don't think you'd see all of a sudden 10,000 former felons be voting Democrat. I don't think that's the case. I really don't.
Your colleagues in the state Senate, Republican colleagues, had some election law changes that didn't become law this past session. Are you in favor of shortening the window for voting? That was one of their proposals.
Well, of course, I don't think that's what we want to do. I mean, really, Iowa's very generous. We have over 700 hours, I'll get it right, of voting opportunities. It's pretty extensive. We're one of the in the country. I think we're pretty comfortable where we're at right now on that. I'm more in the mechanics again. I'd like to make sure we're dealing with the processes of it.
We've got about 30 seconds left. Should Iowa go to just a mail-in system like Oregon and Washington, some other states? You just mail in your vote, none of this go to the polling booth?
That sounds like what the cool kid does, kind of thing. Well, if the cool kid does it, we ought to do it. Iowa has one of the best records right now. We're in one of the highest percentage voting, highest percentage for voter registration with the way we're doing it now. These other states who do the vote by mail, they're not as good as we are as far as participation. So I don't think there's a real movement for change.
There's a movement to end this show on time. Thanks, Mr. Pate, for being with us today.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it.
All right.
And thank you for joining us. Before we go, a programming reminder. We're launching a new presidential candidate series next week. IPTV presents conversations with the presidential candidates hosted by Des Moines Area Community College. I'll sit down with the New Jersey Senator Cory Booker for a town hall-style conversation on the DMACC campus in Ankeny on Monday, July 15th. Viewers can catch the program online at 7 p.m. Monday evening or Friday, July 19th at 8:30 p.m. on statewide Iowa Public Television. We'll also be back next week for another edition of Iowa Press at our regular air times, 7:30 Friday night and noon Sunday. For all of us here at Iowa Public Television, I'm David Yepsen, and thanks for joining us.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.